So that song was Better Together by Jack Johnson, which is pertinent for a number of reasons. Firstly, for the first time, Kiddush was sponsored by a few people, by our vice chairs. Thank you very much for sponsoring that, guys. That's really kind of you. And there are sponsorship opportunities for Manchester coming up and for November, where we'll be joined by Rabbi Dweck. So please do come forward with that if you can. But also, it's important for a number of other reasons in terms of the context in which we find ourselves. And I'm going to be a bit religious today, if you'll excuse me, and Birshut HaRabbanim with the permission of the rabbis, because there are a few things I think we need to address together. Because we're in a really difficult moment, friends. We remain in one. Today is 1 month before 2 years of the anniversary of the 7th October atrocities. And who thought we would still be here 2 years on? And we see in that context the ongoing hostage crisis, the devastating war, the effects of the population in Gaza, the massive rise in anti-Semitism, but also divisions at times in our own community. We've seen people who are extremely angry with the UK government. We've seen people who are extremely angry with the Israeli government. And we've seen people who are extremely angry with just about everybody. And friends, the point is we need to find ways to come together. And this is a really important thing that we do here at the Board of Deputies. I'm reminded that in about a month's time, just over a month's time, it will be Simchat Torah, which in its own way is the Hebrew anniversary of 7th October. But on Simchat Torah, we read the last portion of the Torah, V'zot HaBracha, which is where Moshe gives a blessing to the tribes of Israel before he passes on the baton to Joshua, and the people enter the promised land. And in that verse, where it talks about the bracha, the blessing that is given to the people, it talks about the context of that, perhaps even the conditions of that. Because it says that this bracha is given behitasef rashi am, at the gathering of the leaders of the people, Yachad Shivtei Israel, the tribes of Israel together. And I think that's really important for us for a whole series of reasons, because that speaks to unity without uniformity. Shivtei Israel are different tribes. They have different families, different histories, perhaps some different ways and traditions, perhaps different political ideas. But it is when that they come together, they receive the bracha, and they enter together the promised land. And this is a really important message, partly because of the wonderful guests we have with us today. Jews are very good at falling out. Not just in the current context, but people are always setting up a new synagogue or setting up a new minyan. They're breaking away. But Rabbi Charlie, Rabbi Josh have achieved something that's been tried many, many times over recent decades, the unification of Reform and Liberal Judaism into Progressive Judaism. And they've achieved, while many Jews specialize in falling out, a coming together of communities. We should give them a big hand, and thank you to Karen as well for her work in that. The second verse that I'd like to come to is from Pirkei Avot, where the rabbis ask us, Mi hacham, who is wise? And the answer is, Halomed mikol adam, someone who can learn from every person. And this is really very, very important. Last month, we saw a very, very terrible thing happen with our guests today. The way that they were treated at a rally, the way they were heckled, the way they were forced off stage was absolutely not that, not the ability to learn from every person. It doesn't say you need to agree with every person. It says you need to listen and learn from every person. And what made me extremely angry about that, and we made a statement at the time, which I reiterate now, is it was just 1 week after Tisha B'Av. And on Tisha B'Av, we learned that the worst tragedies that befell our people, the destruction of our temples and other tragedies, came about because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred between Jewish people. It is the opposite of Yachad Shiftei Israel. We want to end sinat chinam, go to ahavat chinam, and get to that blessing and the promised land. And I'm really sorry about what happened, and we as a community have just got to do better. We've got to do better, friends, and that's really important. Thank you. And the third thing I'd like to cite is again from Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Hillel says, Im ein ani li mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? U'kshe'ani la'atzmi, ma'ani, if I'm only for myself, what am I? And again, this is extremely important. The last time we met, friends, we had a special meeting to discuss the humanitarian situation in Gaza, the ongoing war, the ongoing hostage situation. I thought that was a great model of the coming together of the heads of the people, and Yachad Shiftei Israel. Because whilst people may have disagreed with each other, we disagreed agreeably. People were heard. They spoke very well. There was a really good conversation. And after that meeting, we put out a statement which we hoped reflected the balance of the meeting. And for most people, that statement was received extremely well. But I know some people were critical. And they were critical because they felt that somehow empathy was a sign of weakness. Friends, empathy is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. Later that week, I was interviewed about that statement and the humanitarian concerns that we'd expressed alongside speaking up for the hostages, speaking out against Hamas, criticizing the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who don't show that nuance, who are organizing their first demonstration while the massacres and atrocities of 7th of October were happening. And what did I receive back? We received letters from members of the public, general public, I would guess from their names, Christians, but I don't know, and Muslim friends as well, who said, you know what, listening to you, I agreed with every word. Not just the words about concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, that is important as well, but everything we said, everything, because empathy, showing empathy allows us to be heard on the other things too. There is this tradition now, and it's amplified by social media, of people thinking that being incredibly strident, showing no nuance, no empathy is the way to work. You know what? Some of those people are very effective in rallying the base. And that's important. I don't criticize that. But it's very important if we're going to reach across. First of all, we need to listen to each other, and we need to be able to hear each other. But second of all, we need to listen to others, and we need to be able to make our case and show empathy. So friends, this is my advice to our advocates: try empathy. It's a really good way to go. It's really always a pleasure to speak to the announcements. And oftentimes, unfortunately, we have condolences or sad things to convey. Actually, I don't have any on the list today. It's all mazel tovs, which is exactly what we want. And I'm going to start with a very special one, which is to Deputies Victor Huglin and Sue Haddon on their wedding today. Why they couldn't come here and then have the wedding afterwards, I don't know. But they had their wedding, they're having their wedding today, and we wish them mazel tov. To Deputy Claire Morland on the birth of a granddaughter, to Deputy Jack Feldman and Maureen on their 63rd wedding anniversary on the 16th of September, to Deputy Judith and Mark Princely, who celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary on August 14th, to Deputies Louis Trapp and Nina Morris-Evans on their recent wedding, to Deputy Josh Aronson on being elected as a delegate for the World Zionist Congress, to James Harris, Deputy for Stanmore and Cannons Park United on his wedding to Charlotte, to Matthew Buchhalter, Deputy for BBYO on his sister Charlotte's wedding to James Harris, and Malcolm and Gail Taylor, who very kindly hosted me in Leeds just this weekend on their 20th anniversary. With so much romance, I wonder, is this a plenary or is it Love Island? I don't know. You'll be the judge. And also special mazel tov to Adrian and Marie, who are off on an anniversary trip to New York, and that's why they're not here with us today. So without any further ado, oh yes, and I should say, Karen has just come back this morning. This is the diligence we have from Karen Newman, from an anniversary trip, 40th, am I right to think? 40th anniversary trip to New York. She came back specially this morning to chair this meeting with a normal applause. To her I hand over. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Phil. Is that good? Yes, that's good. I can hear it's good. Okay, so you know most of the housekeeping rules. I'm going to go through them very briefly. If you hear a fire alarm, we know of no drill, so you need to take it seriously. The losers, I think you know, are out to the left, and then they are on the right. I will remind you, as Phil has already done, about the usefulness of a bit of empathy, usually because it helps to be polite and to avoid slander, which is always a useful thing to do at meetings. This meeting is not going to be live streamed, but we are hoping that with very little editing, it will go out on Monday. So you will be able to access it there, and it will be in the public sphere. I need to remind you that we may well have members of the press on the call on Zoom. So if you could bear that in mind, that would be helpful. If there is anybody on Zoom who is still identifying themselves by things like iPad 3, could you replace that with a rather more meaningful name? That would be helpful. I would also remind you that it's always great to have first-time speakers. and to encourage those who don't speak often to come forward. I will probably try and not let people speak twice. So if you do have the mic, please do everything you want to do with it as concisely as you can, so that you won't be too upset if you're not called back to say something you forgot to say the first time. The final thing is, particularly to people on Zoom, if you could make sure your cameras are on and you adhere to the accessibility guidelines and you don't mumble and you don't have your hands in front of your face, that would be particularly appreciated. Great, enough from me. How fantastic is it that we have Rabbi Charlie and Rabbi Josh with us? And I would like to waste no more time before calling them both to the mic and turning the floor over to them.
Mr. President, honorary officers, deputies, friends, thank you for welcoming us here today. We are honestly delighted to be with you and are very grateful to Michael and to all the honorary officers for this invitation. We are, as you've heard, Rabbi Charlie Baginski and Rabbi Josh Levy. Until recently, we served as the chief executives of Liberal Judaism and the Movement for Reform Judaism, respectively. But today, together, we are the co-leads of the new Movement for Progressive Judaism, formed from the combination of our two movements, which is due to be completed by the end of this year.
For those who don't know us, it might be helpful just to share a little bit of our backgrounds. Both of us have long histories as active, engaged participants in Jewish communal life. We both grew up in engaged families, are both graduates of youth movements, and continue to be deeply committed to the peer-led Zionist youth movement model. Charlie spent a significant amount of time in Israel and is an Israeli citizen, and I started my career in Jewish education 30 years ago this month. We're also both rabbis. We've both led congregations, taught Torah, celebrated smachot, and mourned losses with our communities. We're both members of our respective clergy bodies and are and will always be deeply grounded in Jewish communal life. We wanted to recognize that there is therefore an ambiguity for some about our role as CEOs and as rabbis, which merits a word of explanation. It is a deliberate choice that we lead our new movement as rabbis. We hold the responsibilities of chief executives, but our deeply held conviction is that a religious movement must be led religiously. That leadership is not only an organizational function, but it's also an act of religious responsibility.
While we are also rabbis, we should stress that we are not the senior rabbis of our movements. Our rabbinate does not work in a hierarchical way. Each of our clergy is Marada Atra, employed by their communities. We're blessed with 100 clergy, each of whom helps create the rich tapestry of progressive Jewish life in this country. It is also worth acknowledging that there are two of us. It is intentional that we do this in co-leadership. Co-leadership is itself a model of what we believe Jewish leadership should look like: collaborative, dialogical, willing to hold differences and disagreements together, and we will return to both those features in a while.
We were asked to speak today about our vision for Jewish life in the UK. And we want to begin by acknowledging that there are many different ways of speaking about the Jewish community of this country. One way is to understand the community as just that, the community, capital T, capital C, as a unity, something that is or should be ideally largely homogeneous. In this version, there is a nominally normative, dominant form of Judaism and Jewish life, and other groupings are seen as somehow a divergence from that, and maybe as somehow deviant. And that can translate into a view that the diversity that exists among us is problematic. It's to be hidden. It's to be managed quietly, never shown too publicly, because somehow that weakens us. This version of Jewish homogeneity is not one you'll find in our tradition. And it's not historically been the way that Jewish life has flourished. And it does not reflect our reality today. The Jewish community in Britain is more diverse now than it has ever been. In practice and observance, in culture, in politics, in language, in geography, in how people identify and how people express their Jewishness. And there is no sign of that changing. The reality of our community is diversity.
And it is that reality that inspires us. Our vision is of a Jewish community that proclaims this diversity, that embraces the fact that in modernity there are a variety of different models of Jewish life, and sees these as something not to be struggled against or resented, but to be celebrated, not as a competition, but as a rich collaboration, not something to be hidden, but to be lifted up. Jews look different. They live in different places. They pray in different ways. They hold different political views and live out their Jewishness differently. And that's not a problem to be solved, but a richness to be celebrated. This is, of course, not only true in the Jewish community, but as a whole within every stream and every institution. It is certainly true in progressive Judaism itself. This is why we so rarely say, this is what progressive Judaism thinks, because there is not a single progressive Jewish view on every issue. Our movement, our rabbinate and cantorate, contains wide difference. Challenging as this can sometimes be, this is not a flaw, it is the point.
So why do we call this a vision rather than just an observation? Because we believe that this diversity is not only our lived reality, it's also a fulfillment of a Jewish ideal. Our tradition does not and has never demanded a single voice. The Talmud preserves multiple views side by side and then declares, Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. The Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin condemns any court in which there is unanimity of opinion, because disagreement is necessary for us to probe one another and make good decisions. Ours is and has always been a tradition of argument, of contradiction and plurality. The primary form of our intellectual life is dialogical. Our tradition contains a multiplicity of often contradictory voices. Where peers in history did not disagree, our texts go out of their way to create disagreement across generations in order to probe and explore issues. Because if we start from a place only of disagreement, Jewish tradition tells us that there's something missing.
The American scholar, Shaul Magid, recently wrote an article with a striking image. Judaism is a map, he says, not a GPS. A map offers you a wide terrain with many routes. Some are winding, some are steep, some more direct. But the point of a map is that there is more than one way forward. The danger, Magid warns, is when we collapse that map into a GPS, when we imagine there is just one route and any step off it makes the voice command say, recalculate. Jewish tradition has always insisted on the map. Torah is said to have 70 faces. But we also know that in times of crisis and trauma, the temptation to collapse into GPS is strong. We long for certainty and safety. But we should resist this urge if we want to keep our communities strong.
The past decade has given us overlapping traumas. The anti-Semitism crisis of the Corbyn years, the polarization of Brexit, the isolation of COVID, and now the horror of 7th of October, the war in Gaza, and the surge of anti-Semitism across the UK. These are not separate blows, but a cumulative shock to our system. And collective trauma, we know, narrows our imagination. It pushes us towards the GPS. It takes us away from the map. It makes us crave certainty, even at the cost of nuance. In those moments, disagreement can sound like or feel like betrayal, and complexity can feel like danger.
And as you know, we experienced this directly for ourselves on the 10th of August outside Downing Street. We were invited to speak at the rally for the hostages. We were clear in advance what we would say and that we would be echoing the words of the hostage families in Israel. We spoke, as we always do, about the brutal reality of Hamas violence on the 7th of October, the moral responsibility for that which happened. We spoke about the hostages, the families who live with the unbearable pain every day. We also acknowledged things that others did not say. We spoke of the need for ceasefire, in part because this is the demand of the hostage families in Israel. We also recognized that Palestinian self-determination is legitimate, but stressed that the pathway to it and how it is achieved really matters. And if we had been able, we would also have spoken as Jews, as rabbis, about our tradition's commitment to all human life. But we were not able. From some in the crowd, our words were met with hostility. We were booed and shouted down.
There's not great value in us revisiting the events of that afternoon. But what we should say is that this closing down is a symptom of our moment and something that we living in diaspora need to face. Because those words about hostages, about compassion, about Palestinian statehood, those are being spoken every week in Israel. Hostage families stand up in Tel Aviv and say them with anguish and fury. They criticize their government whilst pleading at the same time for unity as Jewish people. And that's one of the things that we celebrate about Israel, that at its best, it models noisy, passionate public disagreement. And we rightly contrast this with Gaza under Hamas, where the space for open dialogue is non-existent. Among the most powerful emails we received after that day were messages of gratitude from hostage families and some of those who had lost loved ones on October the 7th. Not from all of them, because not all Israelis think and feel the same any more than all Jews here do. But there was a recognition that multiplicity of voice here makes a difference there. And in the days that followed, we also received messages from across the spectrum here, from progressive Jews, from Orthodox Jews, from people who agreed with us, and from people who do not, but all of whom understood that such words must be able to be spoken and that Jewish life in this country cannot be narrowed into one voice.
That moment is an example of the danger of univocality. When we collapse into a single voice, we mistake disagreement for disloyalty. We silence nuance and we damage our community. And perhaps most tragically, we downplay the beauty of Jewish life itself. The arguments, the differences, the contradictions. These are not weaknesses. They are the very source of our vibrancy. And in this, leadership matters. These two versions of our community, homogeneous or diverse, imply two very different models of leadership. The homogeneous version produces leadership as certainty, as a single voice, neat, compelling, but narrow. This is not a question of left or right. We see this model from leaders on both sides of the political spectrum. Zach Polanski of the Green Party is an example of how even a movement that began with collaborative models can be pulled towards univocal leadership. But it is not our vision. It is not reflective of Jewish values or Jewish tradition, and we genuinely believe that it makes us weaker.
And we believe too that it also carries real risks for us. To say this is what Jews think inevitably alienates those Jews who don't think like that. It pushes people out at a time when our greatest task is to be welcoming them in. To say this is what Jews do or this is what Jews look like, what does that mean for Jews who do not look like that or act like that? This is an especial challenge for us, for Jews of color, for Jews in interfaith families, for Jews whose lives do not fit the stereotype, because in their encounters with the outside world, they experience a mismatch. And this is not just an abstract risk, it affects real people. And it also weakens us as a community. No one benefits if those issues that concern all of us, love of Israel, concern about anti-Semitism, fear for the hostages, defense of freedom of religion, no one benefits if those become owned or associated with one group, one political or denominational viewpoint. If that happens, then we are all worse off.
Univocality also raises the complexity of the issues we face. The issues we face are complicated, and we are complicated. Sometimes it might be a little messy, but we have to step into that complexity, to be brave enough to say complicated things, even in a world of oversimplification. Brave enough to recognize that we don't all think the same, don't all agree. When the government recognizes the state of Palestine, as it will in a couple of weeks' time, it will be easy for us to fall into univocal leadership, to say the Jewish community thinks. It will be harder for us to say something complex, something nuanced. It will be harder, but more powerful and a sign of our strength to recognize our diversity. Can we find a way to say there are also things happening that we welcome? That the New York Declaration, for example, has made enormous steps, especially in the Arab world's rejection of Hamas and recognition of Israel, while at the same time expressing our shared fear that it feels like the hostages are falling from view, our shared concern that there appears to be an asymmetry of expectation on Israel and not on the PA and Hamas. Can we say this and this? Elu ve'elu. Can we find a way to speak that is brave enough to reflect that many, most of us, still hope for a diplomatic solution? Two states living side by side in peace and security, and that this ultimately requires Palestinian statehood. To not inadvertently give the impression that we reject it in principle, and to recognize the diversity of Jewish views. Can we model a form of leadership that is collaborative, that lifts up diverse voices and makes space for disagreement?
Our ability to hold that disagreement is a key to who we are. We have sat in many meetings and panels and demos where people have said things that we don't agree with. And that's okay. That is the work. But it's also Jewish life. The question is not do we all agree, but whether we can disagree well. A text from the earliest layer of Rabbinic Judaism, the Tosefta, brings beautiful imagery to this ideal. It recognizes the very real challenge of disagreement. The house of Shammai declares something unclean. The house of Hillel declares it clean, it says. This one prohibits and this one permits. How then can I learn Torah? Surely, it asks, the purpose of discussion is to reach a conclusion. Otherwise, how do we ever know anything? The answer is extraordinary. All the words have been given by a single shepherd, it says. Make yourself a heart of many rooms. bring into it the words of those who declare unclean and the words of those who declare clean. That is, the goal of Jewish conversation is not unanimity. It's not agreement. To be a Jew, the text says, is to inherit a tradition which is not just comfortable with disagreement, but which embraces it, to build a heart of many rooms.
This is not easy work. It requires our constant attention. The concept of Jewish peoplehood itself shows how easily we can narrow a map into a fence. The word peoplehood is modern. It was coined in the United States in the early 20th century by Mordecai Kaplan and Stephen Wise. They wanted a concept softer than nation and less threatening than nationalism, a way of affirming Jewish belonging without undermining loyalty to the countries in which Jews lived. It was meant to be a map, a broad landscape. But too often, peoplehood has hardened into a fence, a way of policing boundaries, deciding who is in and who is out, who is loyal enough, who has the right to speak. Instead of broadening the map, it has shrunk it. Felix Adler, writing more than a century ago, offered a different vision. He said that a group's strength does not lie in sameness, but in unlikeliness of function, in the fact that different individuals bring different roles and perspectives to a shared moral project. That is what peoplehood should mean.
And this is why we believe that this institution, the Board of Deputies, still matters, perhaps matters more now than it ever has. Founded to represent Jews to the Crown, it can now only fulfill this representative role for a diverse Jewish community if it resists any urge to collapse diversity into that single voice. In truth, if Jews were homogenous, we would not need meetings like this at all. We would not need a board at all. The very existence of this institution and of so many people sat here today is testimony to our diversity. The board matters because it is a place where difference can be represented and held. Now, that is not easy. It is demanding and uncomfortable, and we do not envy the task of those who take it upon themselves. But it is now, perhaps more than ever, indispensable. Because when the board reflects our diversity, when it seeks to be a heart of many rooms, it can represent us to government and to wider society, but also it can represent us back to ourselves and uplift all of us.
We want to end with our vision of progressive Judaism, because everything that we have said about diversity and leadership, about risk and opportunity, comes together here. The merger of liberal and reform Judaism into one movement for progressive Judaism is itself a statement of vision. It is not about flattening differences. It is about creating a larger, more beautiful map. We now represent 80 communities across the UK, the largest synagogue body by number of congregations in the UK, serving over 35,000 Jews. Our communities stretch across the 4 nations, from east to west, south to north, from Cardiff to Norwich, from the Isle of Wight to Edinburgh.
And each of those communities is different. Each has its own identity. Each is shaped by the people who formed it, seeking to create a rich and meaningful Jewish life for them and their families. And within each one is its own diversity. Those with long roots in UK Jewish life, interfaith families, Jews by choice, LGBTQ+ Jews, Israelis, deeply committed Zionists, fierce critics of Israeli government policy and UK government policy, younger Jews shaped by digital culture, older Jews carrying memory. This diversity is not weakness, it is our strength.
And as we build a new movement, we have the opportunity to strengthen this diverse, rich, beautiful Jewish life, to strengthen, support and connect communities so that wherever Jews live in the UK, inclusive, innovative, vibrant Jewish life is possible. To promote, to amplify and embolden our values so that they shape Jewish conversation and wider society. To inspire and nurture the next generations of progressive Jews so that our values are carried forward with energy and commitment. To foster inclusion and access so that anyone who wants to live a progressive Jewish life is welcomed and resourced to do so.
Our tradition tells us that Torah was not given to the angels, but into human hands. It was not given with an expectation of certainty, but with possibility and with a guarantee of argument. Our hope that we hold as CEOs of our new organization and as rabbis, deeply immersed in the UK Jewish community and deeply immersed in our textual life. Our hope is that Jewish life in the UK can mirror that Jewish truth. Diverse, resilient, intellectually alive, spiritually compelling, and capable of holding difference and disagreement without fracture. And if we can achieve that, if we can achieve that in our communities, in this board, across the Jewish world, then we will have built not only a future for British Jewry, but also a model for others outside of our community in this country. At a time when it is desperately needed, a vision of how it is possible to live with difference, of how it is possible to argue with integrity, and how it's possible to stay in the room with one another, even when we disagree. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Charlie and Rabbi Josh, for a wonderful address. It's wonderful to have you here. You're so very welcome. I'm reminded of something that the chair of the International Criminal Court once said. He said, complexity is not chaos, it's just complicated. Thank you. And I want to hand over to Phil for any thoughts he may have.
Thank you so much for that really wonderful speech, and also just more generally for being such good friends, mentors and teachers to me and to so many of us in our community. I think all of us, we embrace the challenge that you set us. Being a heart of many chambers is absolutely what we seek to be, challenging though it is, messy though it is. As I said at the beginning, our function, our role is to follow that adjuration, to find that diversity and somehow craft that into what we can do together, because we achieve more, we achieve the blessing, we achieve access to the promised land by doing that together. So thank you so much for giving up your time to be with us, and thank you for everything you do. Mazal tov again. Shana tova.
Friends, I was looking around the room. I could have cut them short, but as I looked around the room, clearly everybody wanted to listen to what Rabbi Charlie and Josh had to say. But it means we need to be disciplined now because we are a bit behind. So I'd like to move now very swiftly to the approval of the July plenary minutes. You've all had an opportunity to read the minutes of our last meeting, which took place on the 6th of July in Brighton and, of course, on Zoom. As far as I know, we have received no amendments, and you've got one.
Which I really should have picked up. It's a very, very tiny one, which is my own response about into the regional. Sorry, in terms of my response to the debate on the regional communities, where I speak about supporting political engagement and hustings, it says in 2025. It should say in 2026. That's it.
Thank you very much. With that, can I approve the minutes of the July meeting as a correct record of the July meeting? I'm seeing lots of nods. I'm seeing nobody against. Thank you very much. That's great. So we then move to the next agenda item, which is questions to the President and the honorary officers. As you all know, we will be on the clock. You will have 1 minute to ask your question. And I am going to ask you if you could direct your question to a named honorary officer. It's much easier for us to handle the discussion. Is this working? Yes. Are we happy? Yes. It's much easier for us to handle the discussion if you do direct your question to a named honorary officer. So, Jerry Lewis, father of the board, the floor's yours.
Jerry Lewis, Hampstead Synagogue. First of all, could I just ask, we had a brilliant meeting in August. Can we have the minutes of that meeting, please? There's nothing secret about it, but it's an important meeting, and I don't see why in the history of the board we can't see the minutes. Second of all, I listened very carefully to what you said, President. I understand and agree with most of the ideas you've put forward with regard to communal unity, but I have to say with deep regret that the events taking place later on today are something I cannot support and many others in the community refuse to support. And it's a shame we at the board, even though not in publicity terms, endorsing what they're doing, are tacitly endorsing the CAA. They've got a very checkered history. They've done stunts, they've done lots of other things which are out of order, out of kilter with our community. And I pray and hope, and I know it's the time, I pray and hope that we find better ways of dealing with the issues we should be putting on our own demonstration on anti-Semitism, not letting others take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I've got Paul online. I'll take you next, Paul, and then the two people here in the room. So Paul, and then I don't know your name, for which I really apologise.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul Hart, Mosaic Liberal Synagogue, 76, grandfather of the board. My question is to Phil. Will synagogues affected by the dismissal of their deputies be allowed to send substitutes? And that's from one of my members of my shul.
Thank you very much, Paul. Please, the floor is yours.
Chair, President, honorary officers, deputies.
Can you give us your name and your constituency,
Goldberg,
please?
Kenton United Synagogue. Thank you. I'll first start by thanking the President for his help regarding the Brent twinning with Nablus, and also the Vice President for his assistance with the statement publicised by the North West London Faith Officer, which had been written by the chairman of the Brent Multi-Faith Forum. However, my constituency are not satisfied with what the Board of Deputies has done thus far. The twinning is going ahead without consultation with faith groups. A company has been set up for twinning. A concert has been arranged at Wembley Arena on September the 17th for Palestinian charities. And on the 18th, NECAP are also participating. The North West London Faith Officer is still in place, no apology or resignation, and there's no Orthodox representation on the Multi-Faith Forum. I received on the WhatsApp for help, there's Orthodox, 2 deputies replied to me stating that they knew this would never happen in their own borough.
You are on red now.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to know what the boards are going to do about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another speaker in the room, and then Susan Pascoe.
Thank you, Zach Bates-Fisher, Movement for Reform Judaism. We've heard a little bit about what happened to Rabbis Josh and Charlie already at the march a couple of weeks ago, and you've rightly said that the board condemns it. I wanted to ask what the board plans to do in the future in terms of communal leadership and trying to make sure that leadership is done in a way that's inclusive of the whole community. Thank you.
Susan, and then the next 2 people in the room.
Susan Pascoe, Israel Community. I wanted to raise the issue of the person who had the poster in their window of their house, in their private property, supporting Palestine Action, which was visible to passers-by. So the police correctly said that this is not an offence, which was right for Section 13 of the Terrorism Act 2000. But as UK Lawyers for Israel has pointed out, this may be an offence under Section 12(1)A of the Terrorism Act, even if it's in private property, because it may encourage others to support the organisation. Now, the Board of Deputies was reported in the media as saying that if the police says it's fine, it's okay with us. So what I'm asking in future, if this point about it potentially being a terrorist offence could be taken into account before the board comments to the media. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I've got two speakers and then Josh Davis, but I'm disposed to ask you, Phil, if you want to respond to that batch of questions.
Sure, and I might ask particularly Andrew to come in on some of the things. Jerry, we'll consider the question of the minutes. I don't know if minutes were taken because we held the meeting in a particular different kind of way. It wasn't a formal plenary. But we'll have a think about the question. It's not an unreasonable question. In terms of the CAA march, I'll be going myself and I will be marching there. I think, and I understand that there are people who have different views. As I said, there are different tribes of Israel. But I think as far as possible, we should try and show unity. And I think on the question of anti-Semitism, it does not help us to engage in needless division. So that's why we are taking that action. And those deputies want to join me are very welcome so to do. Paul Hart asked about dismissal of deputies. We haven't dismissed, to my knowledge, any deputies of late. But I know that there is a question of an ongoing appeal which is ongoing. I mean, technically speaking, if a deputy is suspended, and as we say, we wait a suspension, the results of the appeal, the movements themselves have the choice of what to do. They can either say we wish to maintain our deputy, albeit suspended in position, and that's a choice they can make, or they can say, you know, we'd like to fulfill that place. So that's really ultimately a question for denominations. We're very much in touch with the different communities involved, but as I say, there's an appeal underway. It'll be easier to come to a view into guidance once that appeal is concluded, which I hope will be in the coming weeks. Rochelle, to the question of Brent, we, as you know, I can't remember if you were involved in your chair, we led a delegation to meet the leader of Brent Council. This is now very much with London Jewish Forum who are taking forward the next steps, and I'm not sure whether Michael or Amanda are here. If they are, welcome to speak. Otherwise, maybe best to reach out to them in the first instance. But we're very much mindful of those challenges. I myself live in Brent. Just to correct, on the Brent Multi-Faith Forum, there is a representative of Bronsbury Park Synagogue, which I represent. I know that. In terms of Zach, absolutely, good question. Look, I think what we are, in that event, we had taken a number of assurances about what the nature of the event was going to be. And as you heard from Rabbi Josh and Charlie, they had received assurances as well about the speech and they'd share the content of it. So our hope and expectation was that those commitments would be honoured. They haven't been. And so I've said in the answers to the question, I think maybe from you, maybe someone else in the President's statement, we want groups like Stop the Hate to be absolutely clear that they've got policies and the ability to enforce those policies in place before we do that. What happened was really unacceptable, and we said that then and we'll say it now again. But thank you for that question. And to Susan, the question of Palestine Action, that quote in the Times was an errant quote, and you might have seen that it was subsequently corrected. So we are following that. We'll ask Andrew to pick up on any of those points.
We were very clear, and we corrected that quote online. That was, as the President has said, a totally errant quote, and we've dealt with it and gone through the journalist accordingly. We aren't in a position to vary. We're watching very carefully. The decisions as they come into court will be made by magistrates, but we're really watching very, very carefully about what goes on and how it goes on. And I think it's really important to understand and support and listen and to stay within. Don't comment on it, just don't make ourselves the story on it. This is something that the magistrates will deal with, and we should watch very carefully. And as people probably will get fines on there, and fines mount up, let's watch, let's hold our advice back, talk quietly on this, but let the law take its process.
Thank you. I'm very keen to fit in as many speakers as I can. I've got two in the room and then Josh Davis.
Emma Brand, EHRS. Last week, Bezalel Smotrich unveiled a plan for near total annexation of the West Bank. Now, I'm not here asking you to again condemn a particular government minister with whom I think many of us will disagree, but this is a powerful person in the government of a country that we as an organisation and as a community tie ourselves to, who is openly advocating for apartheid and ethnic cleansing. Will the President affirm that this board does not and will not support a vision of a one-state, apartheid, Greater Israel, and that he will vociferously champion a vision for a two-state solution where one of those states will be recognised as Palestine?
Thank you.
Lawrence Ray, Thanet and District Reform. Okay. Okay. Lawrence Ray, Thanet and District Reform Synagogue. I'd like to first very strongly endorse the powerful call to reconciliation, empathy, and recognition of diversity that we've heard this afternoon. However, there is a very significant and divisive issue that is still casting a shadow over the proceedings of the board, and this has been referred to by Phil just now, involving suspension of 5 of our colleagues. Now, in answer to a written question, number 6, I think, the President says that, the President denies that there was an attempt by United Synagogues deputies to exert threats of withdrawal of funding to affect the outcome of a complaints and disciplinary procedure. Unfortunately, in documents leaked to the Jewish Chronicle some months ago, and in documents that have been circulated elsewhere, the Chief Executive suggests that indeed such threats were made. So the question is, which is correct? Were threats made or were they not? And when on earth is this process going to be resolved? It's been going on now for nearly 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've got Josh Davis and then 2 people in the room.
Thank you. Josh Davis, Richmond Synagogue. My shul is shortly to host a visit and a talk from a group called the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry. They're a Christian Zionist organisation and evangelical missionaries. At a committee meeting recently, there was some discussion about the wisdom of this. So on the plus side, they come with offers of solidarity and stories of good charitable works. And on the minus side, they preach the mass conversion of Jews. They parade converted Jews as trophies, and their support for Jews in Israel appears to be predicated on the basis that us being there is a precondition for the second coming of Christ. At the end of this discussion, one of my colleagues said, well, we can't be the only ones dealing with this problem. What does the Board of Deputies think? So, what does the Board of Deputies think? I suppose this is to Phil. Should we be welcoming such people into our communities, or should we be handling them with care?
Thank you very much. I've got the 2 people in the room and then Sylvia Hartman online.
Harry Lamper, under 35 observer for St Albans Missouri Synagogue. About this time last year, in my first plenary, I raised a point which people don't like talking about, but members of our community have for years avoided conversations about the recognition of a Palestinian state by citing that it would be rewarding terrorism. The terms that the Palestinian Authority have agreed to include the removal of Hamas and the Palestinian state being demilitarized. Why would recognizing Palestine under these very specific terms be deemed a reward for terrorism? And how long is the cooling off period before this excuse to avoid difficult conversations is no longer valid? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Milne, Deputy for Yachad, and it's a question for you, Phil. First, to just appreciate your comments on empathy at the beginning. I appreciate them, I'm sure a lot of others do. Secondly, to welcome what we heard from Rabbis Charlie and Josh about the importance of diversity and a multiplicity of voices. So they spoke very compellingly, I thought, about the importance of nuance and showing diversity of voices in response to recognition of Palestine, which we know will happen shortly by the UK government. Obviously, board statements have opposed that and presented it as a reward for Hamas, but I represent, as you know, a constituency, Yachad, that has many thousands of supporters who engage with us because of our support for issues such as recognition. We recognise it as essential for 2 states, and in fact the opposite of a reward for Hamas. In 2 states there will be no place for Hamas, who in fact do not want 2 states. So when the UK recognises Palestine, will you reflect the diversity of views among the community, including my constituents, in your response? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I've got Sylvia and then Josh and then Richard here in the hall. Sylvia, the floor's yours. Yeah, I'm going to stop at 1:30.
Hello, Sylvia Hartman, United Synagogue representative. The United Synagogue, not a particular one. I'm afraid that what I have to say, I've been asked by people from several other organisations to say, but it's also my feelings. The recognition by this country of the state of Palestine It's contingent on certain things that Israel has to do in order to accept this thing, and not one single condition has been laid on Hamas. And therefore, how is it going to be that they're going to vote for a state of Palestine with Israel still in the corner as the wrong party when they are the wronged party? We are not looking at this the right way round, and the Board of Deputies, as such, should be out there trying to put over the fact that Israel is not in the wrong, it is being wronged. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got two speakers in the room, but I'm disposed to ask you, Phil, if you want to respond to some of these questions.
Absolutely. You're in good voice today, Deputies. Some very good questions, as always. First of all, I noticed on the Zoom that Ephraim has joined us, and I just want to wish him a refuah shalema b'karov, a full and speedy recovery following his recent illness. So to go, thank you. Yeah, that's right. You're being further acknowledged, Ephraim. So to go through these questions, Emma, I would just take variance with the phrase tie ourselves to. I don't think we're tied to any government in any country. We're a non-party political organisation. We act without fear or favour to governments in this country and indeed in Israel and other countries as well. But I am, as you suggest, concerned by the annexation proposal. We're critical, and I'll come back to the recognition of Palestine to all the other questions, but one of our criticisms of that move is that it's a unilateral move. It's a unilateral move that doesn't lead us in the right direction. And by the same token as we're concerned about a unilateral move on recognition, we're also concerned about unilateral moves by the Israeli government towards annexation, which we think is the wrong way to go. We support, as an organisation, the two-state solution. We don't want to see that eroded, and we think it's the wrong move. And I've been very clear to Israeli ministers and senior diplomats that whilst I recognise the democratic mandate of that government and the support of those parties who are elected democratically for the settlement enterprise, I recognise that that is their prospectus and what they were elected on. There are concerns about that in our community, and there are likely to be diplomatic consequences for those actions, along the lines that you hinted at. We are very clear on that point. So we don't want unilateralism. We want to work towards progress towards a two-state solution, and that is the message we are giving to the UK government, and it is the message we're giving to the Israeli government as well. As for Larry's question, I think that there's what you've said and what's here is not necessarily a contradiction. Of course, there were people on all sides of our community who were very concerned about this situation. That's the part of the challenge that we have, that this issue was of concern. But as it goes, the movement, the question you asked was about the movement, has taken a different stance. And that's, I very much welcome the way that both the United Synagogue and Progressive Judaism have said, and you heard it today from Alice, Josh and Charlie, this organisation matters. And for people who are saying that they wish to pull away, I tell them this: democracy is a participation sport. The best thing to do is to get involved, state your case. You will always be heard politely, and as we have heard today, deputies, you will be heard politely. And the opportunity is there to convince others of your case, and maybe you will and maybe you won't. Depends on the force and the strength of your argument. Obviously, that process is ongoing. I appreciate frustrations about the length of time. I'm frustrated about it as well. But our disciplinary process is as it is. We have volunteers that lead it. It have been the summer months. But I am under the understanding that we're a few weeks away from the full resolution in terms of that appeal panel. But thank you for the question. It's important that we do get that moved and expeditiously. To Josh's question about, and I'm afraid, Josh, I'm not aware of the specific groups. I can't comment on the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry. I just don't know it. But I would say the following thing about evangelical Christianity. There are groups, there are faith communities, including Christianity and Islam, that are missionary faiths. They believe, their worldview, their theology is that for some, salvation is through that belief. That's the well-known theology of both those two faiths. It's not a theology that we share. We don't believe necessarily that we have a monopoly on, for example, salvation in the form of heaven. But interfaith means engaging, if we're willing to, with partners of different faiths. And of course, the great faiths of Christianity and Islam, the largest faiths in this country, are very important to engage with. So When we look at evangelical Christianity, and of course that's more pronounced there, but it's not unique. There are liberal forms of Christianity who still also believe in evangelism, maybe just with a different intonation. We look at what they say about Jewish people, whether there's a genuine matter of respect, whether even if we believe that salvation is in a different place, the relationship can be constructive and productive in the meantime, just as we do with Muslim communities. Interfaith is not always simple, but it is something that we invest in heavily and we review on a case-by-case basis, and I suggest the same.
I want to get 2 more questions in, and time is running.
Sure. Sure, okay. Harry, I'll draw together Harry, Eleanor, and Sylvia, because they're all questions on recognition of a Palestinian state. What I'd say about this is, and we've made some very fulsome statements that try and capture the breadth of obviously not what every single person agrees, but what we think is a consensus. We as an organisation support a 2-state solution, which means at some point recognition of a Palestinian state is the right thing to do. But what I said, and I said this in an article in the Sunday Telegraph, is we want this to be about substance, not about gestures. And what we don't want to have happen is a recognition, and Sylvia alluded to this, with conditions on one party that allows Hamas to claim, as they have done, that this is a reward for the atrocities of 7th October. That's wrong. We don't want recognition to come without the Palestinian Authority, who've been offered a state in various forms in 5 separate occasions and rejected it on all of those occasions, to think that they don't too need to make concessions. And we don't want it to be simply an empty gesture, because my fear is that the day after there's a recognition, if there is one, that people are going to be incredibly frustrated, because the reason that people are out on the streets, not from our community and from other communities, is not because of some theoretical esoteric declaration. It's because real people are dying in a real war, and there are real hostages in real tunnels. And the government should be focused on ending that, not on theoretical declarations. There was a very wise person who said, we don't want to recognize symbolically, we want to recognize in a way of getting to 2 states. That was the former Foreign Secretary David Lammy. I suggest the government takes his advice.
Thank you, Phil. I'm very keen to hear from Josh and from Richard. So if you two go ahead, and then if we have time, I'll take Peter Bafus online, if we have time. And I'm going to ask both of you to be as concise as you possibly can. If you know it's already been said, please try and resist the temptation to say it again.
Josh Aronson, Zionist Federation UK. 3 weeks ago in Israel, I facilitated a memorandum of understanding between the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce and the Druze community, who are one of our greatest allies. Can I ask the board to perhaps facilitate a memorandum of understanding with the Druze community? So President Herzog is supposed to be coming on Thursday, but today they are evaluating because calls to arrest him when he arrives. Can we ask the board to make sure that ensure that government officials put out a statement inviting him? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. Richard.
Yeah, iPad 3, Wembley, Spanish and Portuguese. Sorry, Richard Sassoon. Without wishing to be monovocal, cabinet reshuffle, is it good for the Jews?
Thank you, Richard. So I will take the question online from you, Peter Bavin.
Peter Bafus, Exeter Hebrew Congregation. The photographs released by Hamas, allegedly showing children experiencing extreme malnutrition, are in fact children suffering from underlying health conditions such as malabsorption syndrome. And pictures of Palestinians at food distribution centres show no evident sign of emaciation. I would like to ask the honorary officers, where is the hard evidence for the alleged famine in Gaza? Witkoff has stated there is no starvation. Has the International Division any reliable information on the current situation?
Thank you very much. I'll take Rob Sassoon next, and then I'll come to the room if I have time, but I'm not holding out much hope, but I'll try. Rob.
Hello, Rob Sassoon, S&P Sephardi Community. I was going to ask this question to Rabbi Josh and Rabbi Charlie, but I think I'll ask it to Phil anyway. We've heard a lot today about recognising and acknowledging and indeed even celebrating the differences that we have in the British Jewish community. So Phil, my question to you is, do you think there is a single issue on which the entire British Jewish community is united in its view? Thank you.
Thank you. You've been waiting very patiently. I really want to give you the mic, if you can be short. Go ahead.
Jonathan Brodie, Kingsbury Synagogue. Ben, sorry, wake you up. It's actually a repeat of a question I asked you in your first term as Treasurer, whether you would give consideration to implementing some sort of online tool that allows deputies to put questions to honorary officers and to receive responses, you know, in good time rather than it just being 8 times a year. Me being short.
Thank you. Friends, it's 1:40 and it's your Sunday. So I am disposed now to ask Phil and the rest of the honour officers if they want to say anything in response to what we've heard. Is that your pleasure? Yeah? Yeah, I'm getting nods. Okay. Phil, the floor's yours.
Okay, I'll wrap these up quickly, and I know we've got to end smartly because of the shorter meeting. To Josh, the Druze community have been long-standing Trojans, really, in terms of Israel and its security, and I have had the pleasure of visiting Druze communities over the years. I don't know that there's specifically a Druze community in the UK. If you can let me know about that, it's something we can certainly think about, but it's certainly something we can think about affirming our support to the Druze communities. I mean, some of the scenes we've seen in Syria, the atrocities committed against the Druze communities have shaken the conscience of humanity, and we must be alive to that. Richard, on the cabinet reshuffle, you'll be glad to know we've been actively engaging with across the government, including saying thank you to friends who may now not be in position, but also welcoming, hopefully, new friends into position. And we'll be working across departments to advance the views and the issues we think we've got reasonably good chance of getting good results on the things that we care about with the new lineup. Peter, on the question of hunger, there is a huge amount of disinformation out there, I appreciate, and that's really difficult sometimes to pick between the weeds of that. It's not simple. They say in war the first casualty is the truth. But what I have come to through my investigations and asking people both in the UK government, searching questions, and indeed in the Israeli government, in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is that there is serious hunger in Gaza. And that that some of this is consequences of political decisions by the Israeli government. I refer you to the fact that before the conflict, there were 400 aid distribution points across Gaza. There are now 3, and they're all in the south. And there's occasionally a 4th one that opens in the north, but very rarely. And the reality of that is that each time it opens, and the people in the GHF are doing heroic work in terms of the distribution, but thousands and thousands of desperate people charge at those. And I've seen videos of some of it, and I've asked the GHF, and they've confirmed this is the reality of it. 10,000, sometimes young men, all armed with knives, because you need the knives to open the boxes, also to defend yourself from other desperate people who want the aid, also times to try and steal aid in some cases, charge at those points. And I've seen videos. I saw a video, a very troubling video, which was presented by people trying to put Israel's case, where there were soldiers in a dugout and they were faced with a group, and they had the guns up. And the good news story that was being presented there was that the commander was shouting, don't shoot, and they don't shoot. And that's the good news story. What you see in the middle distance is deeply concerning. It is a swarm, and I hate to use these expressions about human beings, but it looks like a swarm of zombies, desperate people charging over an aid truck because there is so much desperation. These are not things we want to see. We've urged the Israeli government to ensure full, complete food aid to Palestinians. We understand the desire not to let Hamas get that food aid. That's important, but it must be that the innocent civilians are not the victims of Hamas's crimes. And we really do urge the Israelis to get this right. You know, the way I would say it, friends, is that Israel started by saying it was stopping aid for 2 months. It's now making a virtue of the fact it's trying to get aid in. If only it had done that from the beginning, we'd be in a very different place. And I think Israel's saying the right things now. It needs to do the right things, and it should have done them from the outset, is my observation. Rob, is there anything on which we all agree with? Well, I can tell you that I've traveled the length and breadth of this country, and I deliver the remarks of what we're doing. And we get a lot of support for almost everything that we're doing. But I would say there's one thing that predominates. The idea of a British Jewish Culture Month next year is universally popular. We're all very excited. I was in Leeds this weekend. They're already making plans. They've got very exciting plans in Leeds. I know many people will do. We'll soon have a form online so that you can submit your brilliant ideas. We're looking for that to be very exciting. Jonathan, for you.
Yes, I can confirm there is an online route to ask questions to our honorary officers. We all have board email addresses, which is firstname.lastname@board.org.uk. I will say that obviously, I would expect any deputy contact us would like a reasoned and thoughtful response. There are 300 deputies. If each of them has a question each month and needs 15 minutes to come back to, that's a week and a half's work for each of us. So we do try and channel questions through these meetings, through divisional meetings. Between the five of us, there's 40 of them a year, and that's our preferred format to respond. But of course, we have emails, and we try and get to them to the extent we can, being volunteers, trying to keep this organisation on track.
Thank you, Ben. Andrew, do you have anything you want to add on some of the questions?
Yeah, just on the reshuffle, which we should pay tribute to the work and friendship with Lord Khan, and Wajid was very special to all of us to have a Muslim faith minister, the first Muslim faith minister, a great friend. And on the point that was made about reform and the question there, in local government and national and regional government, our job at the board is to work with whichever party is in power, and hence in Kent, in Lancashire, in Durham and Warwickshire, where reform are the government in those areas, we will work and are already reaching out in terms of reform locally. If there's a Green Council, we'll work with the Greens in those areas, and we will continue to work with whichever party to make sure our community is represented properly and people understand the needs of our community.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Jeremy, would you like the floor? I feel I have to offer it to you because it would be wrong not to, but
Only very, very briefly. Obviously, the issues at stake have not been the ones that really the Communities and Education Division have been involved in. But I'd like to thank the work of the division. I try and decentralise as much as I can. I know the work that people like Naomi, Sheila, etc., have been doing, and Deborah have been doing tremendous work. And really very, very good indeed. And we've had a lot of very useful meetings with cultural providers, Jewish cultural providers, and who are all, as Phil quite rightly said, they're all very excited about the Jewish Culture Month, and they're starting to get their acts together. So hopefully, over the next couple of months, we'll start to see the diary filling up with potential events, and that is really very, very exciting.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Before I hand the floor to Phil to close the meeting, I want to just apologise myself to the people in the room and the people online who had their hands up. I tried my level best, but there was such a rich number of questions that came forward, we ran out of time. Phil, the floor is yours.
Deputies, thank you again for a really good meeting. Apologies, I'm going to have to scoot off really quickly to the March Against Anti-Semitism, so excuse me if I can't catch you on the way, but some of you I know will be joining us there, others will not, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon. The next plenary will be in Manchester on the 19th of October. There is the opportunity, yeah, exactly right. There is an opportunity to sponsor the Kiddush either individually or in a coalition, as we saw today, so please do come forward on that. In the meantime, between now and then, of course, we have the Jewish High Holy Days and Sukkot, and also the second anniversary of the October 7th atrocities. We'll be marking that with a national event on the 5th of October. There's information available, and I know there will be regional events marking that as well. So I think, friends, let us hope and pray that by the time of our next meeting, we've seen an end to this war. The hostages are home. Israelis and Palestinians, all children of God, are able to start rebuilding their lives and starting to work together towards a sustainable peace that does credit to all of us and to God himself. In the meantime, I wish you all, your communities, your families, a Shana Tova, Umtuka,